I think that most Americans I've talked to are unanimous that they have no problem with undocumented people in the United States being deported if they commit a crime. Okay, so we can all agree on those things. But where I have a big problem with the further strategy of ICE, this just seems something so un-American about ICE going into places like Home Depot and grabbing people who may have been in the country for 10 years, who may have been contributing their taxes through gainful employment, contributing to society, maybe have kids that have been born in the United States. Grabbing those people and throwing them out of the country seems to be quite un-American to me for the reasons Tim articulated. And most of the polling I've seen suggests that at least 2/3, maybe more, of Americans agree that they think that's a step too far. How do you feel about that? I mean, are you comfortable with Home Depot being raided by ICE and people like that who've not committed crimes other than being in the country undocumented?
So that is Piers Morgan, a staunch MAGA Trump ally, finally brutally turning on Donald Trump with respect to his cruel immigration and deportation policies, and really grilling MAGA actor Dean Cain in the most recent episode of Piers Morgan Uncensored. And this becomes a heated debate in the full episode. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, as you know, we cover Piers Morgan a lot here. Number one, because he is probably the most famous journalist on earth. Number two, he has a massively successful channel. Number three, whether you like it or not, he puts together wildly entertaining content in terms of his panels and debates. But again, if you watch the show, you know I'm very critical of Piers because even though he professes to be a nonpartisan journalist, he is heavily biased towards Donald Trump. He grades Trump on a curve. He holds Democrats to higher standards. He pulls his punches with Trump for the most part. However, he has become increasingly critical of things that Trump fucks up on, like the Epstein files debacle, and now even immigration. This represents the most staunch criticism of Trump vis-a-vis immigration and deportations that I've ever seen from Morgan, who's otherwise inclined to cut Trump a lot of slack. So it's pretty impressive that we see this. Now, we're going to play some clips here. You have Tim Miller, also of The Bulwark. He's going to show up in a couple of clips at the end. But otherwise, this is Piers grilling Dean Cain, former Superman actor.
Dean, let me ask you, where do you draw the line?
Well, that's not for me to make that policy. That's up to Director Lyons and Congress. I mean, these are things that Congress should be dealing with, and they should make those laws, and then our ICE agents will dutifully perform those duties. I mean, they'll take care of whatever the law.
But you must have an opinion. You must have an opinion where that line should be drawn, because we all agree that the southern border being closed is a good thing. We all three of us agree that people who commit crimes when they're in the country undocumented, crimes that are not related to their immigration status, that they should be deported. So we've got broad agreement on those two big planks of the policy. The issue that Tim and I have is that we do not believe that just going into Home Depot and grabbing anyone who's undocumented is a particularly American thing to do, particularly if they've been in the country for a long period of time and built lives in America and are contributing to society and paying taxes and so on. So my question before I go back to Tim is simply, if you were helping them reframe the law, where would you draw the line in terms of who you would allow to stay and who you would deport?
So that's a really good question. And again, it's important to remember that the polls support what Piers is saying here in the sense that the Americans are not happy about this. Americans are not happy with what they're seeing. Donald Trump came into office with a skyrocketing approval on immigration, and he's totally killed that in a span of 6 months. He's underwater on immigration. The one subset of immigration where he generally has some sort of positive net approval is on the specific matter of border security, which is, again, merely a subset of his overall immigration policy. And that also depends on the poll. He's not above board and above water on in every poll on border security. So Trump has squandered a lot of the Americans' goodwill. But what's interesting about this is that, as you're about to see, Dean Cain tries to avoid answering the question. He's got a lot of opinions. But when it comes to this particular matter, he punts.
Well, it sounds like you agree on policy but disagree on tactics. on tactics and the way they're doing it, the way they're rolling in. Usually,
no, I don't, because I don't agree with deporting everyone who's in the country undocumented. Do you?
Everyone who's in the country undocumented? Well, that is not my decision to make. But I know that if you're in any other country undocumented, my opinion is if you're here illegally,
what's your opinion, Dean?
I'm trying to give it to you. If you're here illegally, you should have gone through steps to legalize your status. And there's been countless opportunities to do that. There has been tons and tons of opportunities to do that. And you broke the law when you came here. It's the same as in any other country. You've got to find a way to legalize yourself.
So as the debate unfolds, Tim Miller, founder of The Bulwark, he's an ever-Trump Republican, goes into many examples of where Trump's terrible, draconian, cruel, reckless immigration policies, deportation policies have resulted in the detainment and deportation of not just people who are authorized to be here legally, legal immigrants, documented immigrants, but oftentimes American citizens have either been inconvenienced or deported. That's a failure, a grotesque failure of civil liberties, human rights, due process, and it's all the Trump administration's fault. But Dean Cain is bending over backwards to avoid articulating an affirmative preference. Just say, hey, listen, he makes it clear. Actually, yes, he does support the deportation of every undocumented immigrant in this country. He wants to avoid admitting that because he knows it's wildly unpopular, it's very cruel, and it is fundamentally un-American, I would argue. But when push comes to shove, when Piers presses him, it's like, well, you guys knew you broke the law and you should have not done that. So, I guess you're fair game. This is why Trump's approval rating on immigration is plummeting, because of people like Dean Cain who are urging Trump to do the most cruel and unpopular things. Now, the next two clips I'm going to play pivot the discussion specifically to ICE agents wearing masks and often not revealing themselves, identifying themselves. And there's a lot of scandal about this because, people are being detained and, generously, I suppose you would say, brought into custody. You could say kidnapped by masked people claiming to be ICE agents, offering very little or no identification, not even revealing their faces. Now, that's fucking wrong. And this is where, unfortunately, Piers kind of goes back to his inclination to grade Trump on a curve. But Tim Miller isn't having it. And Tim Miller articulates a very fundamental, I would argue, a conservative, depending on your vantage point, reason why ICE officers, ICE agents, no law enforcement officers should be wearing masks in this way.
But my second point was, we all know why they're wearing masks. It's because they're being doxxed left, right, and center on social media and having their lives threatened.
No,
of course they are.
No. This is bullshit. For starters, we have evidence ICE agents aren't being trained. It is. Really quick. Let's go back to George Redis. He arrived at work. He was a U.S. citizen. ICE agents surrounded his car. He identified himself as a U.S. citizen. They broke his window, pepper sprayed him, and dragged him out. He was in detention for 3 days. So we do have evidence that they're not being trained to respect people's rights. And on the masks, this is crazy. Do you know how many judges have been threatened? If you're a judge and you have there's a case that is happening, you're a prosecutor, and you're targeting a murder suspect, these guys have been threatened. There have been judges whose families have been threatened. Their lives have been threatened. There are a lot of people in public life who have been threatened. You still don't get to wear a mask and be a secret judge. Not in a free country. You don't. I'm sure you get threatened. I'm sorry. If you're an agent of the government, if you're a representative of the people, you need to show your face and name yourself so that you have accountability. That is a totally reasonable ask. And so I have no sympathy.
And we'll play another clip in just a second, but that's 100% right. Listen, doxing law enforcement officers is wrong. Doxing anybody is wrong. Public figures get doxed. It's wrong. It's illegal. People who do it should be prosecuted. There's no question about it. However, when you wield the powers of the state as an ICE agent, as a police officer, as an FBI agent, as a judge, as a Secret Service agent, like whatever, as president of the United States, whatever, you are assuming a level of risk. You are assuming a level of risk when it comes to threats. And by the way, threats against government officials and law enforcement officials, it's illegal for a reason and a good reason. But this idea that ICE should be permitted to totally conceal their identities because they're being threatened is absurd. You wield great power, which means you assume a certain level of risk. Risks, by the way, that the state goes out of its way to try to prosecute, right? Again, it's not like it's legal to dox or to threaten or to harass government officials and law enforcement agents. It's illegal. It's criminalized for a reason. The fact that there's still a risk, despite that, doesn't permit you to conceal your identity in a healthy republic where public accountability is important, and it incentivizes abuse of power when you don't have to have that level of accountability. I mean, there's a reason, there's a principle in the law which says that you have a right to confront your accuser in a court of law. There's a reason for that accountability. Like, hey, you're going to bring charges against me, you're going to sue me, you're going to do all these things, then I have a right to look you in the eye. And you have a right to think twice about whether or not you want to bring these charges and bring this case against me, depriving me of life, liberty, property, knowing that you can't do it anonymously. That's just a fundamental bedrock principle of democracy. So again, doxing and harassment and threats against law enforcement officers are rightly illegal. It's wrong. But the fact that it's illegal and wrong doesn't mean that law enforcement agents or government officials get the right to be risk-free by way of just concealing their faces and their identities. It's absurd. The abuse of power is extraordinary.
To step up for her?
Of course not. Of course that's not okay. Of course
Yeah,
we should.
I do think. Yeah, but it's important, Tim, I think, just before you respond, it's very important to acknowledge that ICE are also apprehending a lot of very bad people in this process. I mean, indisputably, you can see the stories every day. So, yes, there are some that are getting through the net, which is unacceptable. I don't like the tactics of storming into Home Depot and rounding up random people who may be undocumented. But we shouldn't be too denigrating of what ICE is doing in removing bad people. That we should all be on the right side of.
I don't denigrate that, but I'm just saying in any job, there are people that are bad apples that act poorly. It's true about podcasting, news hosting, acting. Like, I'm sorry, when you have the force of the state at your hand, you have to be transparent about who you are, and allowing people to be masked and to rough people up without any accountability is just wrong. And what about that guy?
And I want you all to consider, we'll end on this. Dean Cain and even Piers Morgan, so many on the right, are saying it's okay, it's good that these ICE agents are masked because there's a risk to them. I want you to imagine if the FBI agents and law enforcement officers that conducted the raid at Mar-a-Lago or that arrested Donald Trump of the various times he'd been arrested, if they were wearing masks, do you think MAGA would be so generous with the benefit of the doubt? Or would they be saying things like, oh, these masked Biden goons, these masked Biden jackboots trying to, attack our president? That's the sort of thing they'd be saying. They recognize when the shoe is on the other foot that there needs to be accountability and transparency, and that law enforcement officers and government officials, unfortunately, just have to assume a certain level of risk. But when it comes to these cruel, draconian deportations and immigration policy, they want the identities concealed, which will only facilitate abuse of power, and it's fundamentally un-American. I'm with Tim Miller on that. So there you have it, folks. Piers Morgan turning on Trump, but also backing him with respect to asking ICE officers. But this constitutes the biggest shift from Piers Morgan on Trump's immigration policy that I've seen, and I can't imagine it's going to get much better in time to come. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.